We're now joined by Jeremy Fudge. He's a part of the Advisory Council for GxG, Baylor NIL. And then also, he, of course, is the CEO of BAL. He joins us on 365 Sports. Jeremy, thanks for your time with Paul, Craig, and David Smoak. So how would you say the change in the NIL direction for GxG that handles Baylor, was this something that had anything to do with the struggles of this year, or something where it just, my goodness, everybody said it's time to move forward?
Good to be with you guys. Definitely more of the latter. It's not reactionary. It's not because of how the football is going this year. We try to be thoughtful of what's going on around us in the environment, both generally within NIL as well as competitively in schools in Big 12, et cetera. Each sport is different in terms of how it's played out, how it's evolved over the last 2 years of NIL. And so, you saw basketball move a lot quicker towards this sort of model than football did. It's the same with other sports as well. And so it's definitely not just an instant reaction to what's happening right now in the moment. It's something we've been talking about for a while. And in fact, in the beginning of the fall is when we sat down as a group to plan out budget for next year. So we're out pretty far in terms of our actions and how we approach it.
Jeremy, why does it seem to the public, at least for Baylor's name, image, and likeness, that some of this is a secret? Like, not, I see a secret. It's just not publicized that much, because I can't tell you, especially on the post-game show that I do every week, how many times we've gotten questions about it. And I say, listen, I'm told it's good, but I don't know any numbers or facts to tell you about that.
Yeah. If I can answer that more broadly first, and then I'll try to get to a more specific answer. I think what people miss, and I read the message boards too, I try to keep up with it. What people miss in this whole conversation about NIL, I think there's two things. One is, this is new still. This just started in 21. July 21 is when NIL started. And so there's sort of this anguish or this angst about, like, we have missed, we were late to the game. I don't know how many times I've read that line, right? Like these kinds of sentiments. And one, factually, they're just not true. But two, again, July 21, we're 2 and almost not even a half years into this. We're not late to anything. And so there's just a misunderstanding, I think, in that sense of it all. I think there's also a misunderstanding of, the amount of complexity around the rules of NIL. Right. You had the NCAA, you had state laws. In Texas, we have our own state law. Not all states do. And until October of last year, 22, the school couldn't have anything to do at all with this. Right. And yes, there were schools involved with their NILs. Right. We hear and see occasionally some of those stories even pop up. And so not everyone's playing by the rules. Shocker. Right. But the reality is, Baylor was not going to do that. And so it was only until last October that Baylor could even get into this at all. And so all of this, my point is, all of this is about fans, about donors standing up collectives and doing things around NIL, right? And so, some schools, the biggest name schools have the luxury of having a lot of businesses that want to jump into NIL right away. And so they're doing more true like NIL deals where they're saying, come advertise for this car dealership and we'll do this and that for you, right? Baylor historically, Waco historically, we don't have a lot of that business infrastructure around our athletic programs. And so I think, it is misplaced angst or judgment to say Baylor this, Baylor that, athletics this, athletics that, because this is about, by the grace of God, John Passavant saying, I've got some interest in this. I'm willing to put a crap load of my time unpaid into this and stand up GxG. And that was done, the predecessor to GxG was done right after NIL came out. We weren't late to anything. right? And so I think there's a misappreciation of all those dynamics around this that make it seem like we're either behind or we're not doing what we should be doing, or we're not transparent about the dollars or whatever, right? So that's all just sort of a little bit of context. I think the more precise answer to your question is competitively, and you can put this in a business context like my company or anyone else's company. Competitively, you don't want to be showing all your cards to everyone. It really comes down to almost as simple as that, right? Like we do here, and we've got some good feeder lines into some other schools that are our main Big 12 competitors, et cetera, to know kind of where they're at, what they're doing, et cetera. But you don't want to, if we come out and we say we're paying X dollars to this person or this team or whatever, well, now our competitors just go, we're going to pay you X plus 1, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's just not much business reason to say publicly, here's exactly what we're doing, and here's all our numbers, and here's our P&L sheet to look over, right? So I think there's a number of different answers in addition to that, but that's the driver probably of the whole thing. Is there's no gain in that. There's no benefit to us in putting numbers out there like that. We know what we're doing for our players. Our players know what they're doing. And we have a way to talk about that when we're talking about potential players, and that's enough for right now.
Jeremy, to that point of, I see like, well, why can't we spend like this school? I just looked up Texas A&M, Ohio State. They all have over 500,000 living alumni, which I don't think you can snap your fingers and create like an extra 300,000 to get Baylor on par with that. So that size is obviously a challenge. To what extent is it a challenge not having 300,000 more living alumni to pull from? But how have you guys sort of navigated that part of the challenges, knowing you're never going to have that many big guns backing you? So how do you approach that?
Couple ways. BaylorBears.com/GxG. I'm going to probably repeat it about 20 more times. BaylorBears.com/GxG. So I think we approach it a couple different ways. One is, in the first year, we tapped into our main, bleed green and gold athletic fan donor folks, right? And we needed to move quick. Right? NIL just came out of the gate in July 21. We needed to move quick. We needed to do certain things, and into 22 year as well. And so, fortunately, we do have that sort of base of donors. And those are divided across, I'm giving to NIL generally, to I want to give to basketball specifically versus I want to give to football specifically, or women's basketball, or, another sport, right? So that was our initial launch. I think some people have misconstrued something I've said in the past of we're only looking to those folks. That is not the case. We need everyone to participate in this. We need everyone to help with this. NIL is now just part of a scholarship package. That's the way to think about it. So we're past the stage of I'd like this or I don't like this, or I'm gnashing my teeth at the concept of student athletes being paid or whatever. Like, we're past all that. Like, this is just part of the scholarship package. And so just like you are a Bear Foundation member and you pay for scholarships that way, we need NIL money this other way, right? So we need more people involved. A lot of our work over the last, say, 12 months has been, or actually even all the way going back to July 21 when it all started, has been thinking about how do we fund NIL in a sustainable way given our constraints and our realities of Baylor, of Waco, of number of alumni, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of really good ideas coming out of that. Some of them are now coming to actual implementation and go live. And so you'll start to hear and see some more of those things over the next few months even. But it's been thinking about that. So how do we get more people involved? There's a big marketing campaign that's about to start around NIL. We've not tapped out, but we've done a lot with our main big donors. And so how do we get more involved? How do we fund that way? Second is, how do we get more creative options in this space? And there's a lot there. And then third will just continue to be, how do we position our students to succeed, to have deals that are outside of GxG doing it, right? And that's, you think back to very early days of NIL, and Jared McVay made the big play in the championship game, right? And Sikkim did the signed photo, right? That was a great opportunity in a true NIL sense to raise some money based on that. So those are the kind of the concepts kicking around. We don't have the number of alumni. We don't have the number of deep pockets. We don't have the number of things like that. But it doesn't. It's not going to take that much for us to keep sustaining at an excellent level like we have been. And I think that's an important point, because we have not missed on an NIL opportunity that I'm aware of, at least. We've not had someone say, if you don't give me X, I'm out of here, and we didn't have the money for X. Or conversely, we didn't want that player. Like, we may have said, good luck to you, right? But we haven't had a miss in that sense. And so, I think the way to think about the dollar amount as a whole amount of NIL is not so much like we've got, X millions and they've got Y millions, and are we close to that or not close to that? I think the way to think about it is, are we able to do what we want to do to be successful, right? And if the answer to that is yes, then we've got what we need. And that's been our approach really all along.
You may not be able to answer this, Jeremy, but Torian York was committed to Baylor, ended up at A&M. Austin Novosad for a full year committed to Baylor, ended up at Oregon on a late-night flight into Eugene. Were those that, if you have the current, what you're moving forward with deal available, would those two be Baylor?
You're right. I can't totally get into that, but I would say what I said a second ago. We have not had an opportunity to match X that we didn't come up with the money to match X.
So it would just be on they wanted to go there. That's it. Like, that was where it was, right? So if a player, theoretically, based on what you said, like if you matched it, then they're just saying, well, no, I'm going to Y school, right?
Yeah. And the best way I find myself these days talking about NIL is just analogizing to my own company and any company for that matter, right? Someone could say, you lost this great employee to your competitor, you must not be doing good, or sometimes that employee just doesn't come to you, right? They don't give you the chance. Mm-hmm. They just say, I'm out. And you go, oh, surprise. Okay, well, anything I can do? No, nothing you can do. It's I just needed to change of pace. Okay, well, good luck. That's the reality. And so, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that float around, but there's a lot of just normal business world that is now part of this thing, for better or for worse.
You can always choose one job offer.
Yeah, exactly. Jeremy, I want to go back to something you were talking about a little bit earlier when you're talking about how new that NIL is. I have a theory, and again, I'm not trying to point out certain schools or anything, but the ones that seem to be better at this seem to me the ones who already were doing it to a certain level, and then when it was made legal, we're just like, oh, well, great. Now we can actually say out loud, hey, come donate to this.
Yeah. I think there's probably some credence to that theory for sure. I mean, I think that, again, if you think about, because of the size, right, the bigger you are statistically, the more big donors you're going to have. And the more big donors you have, the more you're going to have rabid football or sports fans in that group, right? Just pure statistics. And so, by virtue of what Ohio State has, there are some crazy raving lunatic fans that have deep pockets that were ready, and maybe they were already, to jump into this thing. And so there's just a difference there. But again, I don't see that we have missed any opportunity that we wanted with what we have today. I think we can be successful with what we have today. And we started out with what we thought we needed that year, and then we basically doubled it or slightly over doubled it the next year, and then we're going to double again, basically. And so we're continuing to build out as we see needs increase, and that's not so much because we were short initially, it's because the market is changing, right? What basketball players are getting today is different than 2 years ago, it's different than 1 year ago, and it'll be different next year than this year, right? And so we have to keep stepping up our fundraising goals as the market keeps expanding and growing itself.
Yeah, to Paul's point, the bag man is now the CEO of a collective. This is how it's changed. But Jeremy, for those who don't follow it as closely, as we do in terms of they're hearing that Baylor's making a change or Baylor's doing things differently. Can you explain to folks out there who maybe don't know what are the significant, I guess, adjustments you guys are making now moving forward compared to what you've been doing up to this point?
Yeah, and it's a little bit overly hyped and dramatized, if that's a word, in the moment, right? And I understand why, but we started initially with an approach towards team-wide deals for all sports. Basketball quickly moved in a more personalized direction, and football now is moving in that same direction. So that's really all that's happened is we're shifting from a firm-wide even deal where they can earn more NIL by virtue of their NIL, their value, through external to more of a you can earn more internally as well as externally now in football. And again, that's the case already in basketball. And so it's just aligning those two things basically.
Jeremy, you mentioned about Waco and the infrastructure as far as businesses. There are about 5 or 6 schools in the Big 12 whose city populations are much smaller than Waco. Some of them seem to be more successful with this than others. Is the Waco business infrastructure with what's happening downtown with Chip and Joanna, balconies and all that other stuff, is that better now than it was 2 or 3, 4, 5 years ago?
Yeah, it for sure is. And I think our mayor, Dylan Meeks, has done a lot in that regard for Waco and for Baylor. And so that's been very helpful. There's still a lot of room we can do more there and grow more there for sure. And I'm hopeful that will be the case. But it has improved some. But we're still largely, in most facets of athletics, we're still largely reliant on individual donors versus businesses.
Jeremy Fudge, GxG Advisory Council, and also CEO of BAL with us on 365 Sports.
So, and just to maybe put a bow on this particular part of it, Jeremy, you have said over and over again, confident about the amount of dollars you're putting out and the way of getting players. So this football season sitting at 3-8, you do not feel as a result of lacking in NIL, correct?
Not in a direct sense of we missed on a player because of it or something like that. Mm-hmm. Now, I know I haven't listened to it, but I know you guys are Coach had a media session, his normal Monday media session, and I think you guys did something coming up here shortly with him. I think there's a part of this that I can't speak to that only he can speak to, obviously, of how do you think about it as a coach and how do you use it in terms of recruiting, et cetera. But I think, from my vantage point, yes, I don't think you can necessarily point to something and say, we missed on these players in the portal or something like that. And that's, resulted in our season that we've had. Now, I do think, a system that says you can earn more than your peers, right? Not only externally with whoever might want to pay you for that, but also internally. I think that will have an impact, a positive impact. I mean, that's our thinking and our hope. And I think it helps in recruiting, whether that's high school or whether that's portal. It helps in retention. It helps in all these ways. But there's nothing, you can't draw a straight line, is I guess what I'm saying, of because we didn't have $2 million more dollars, we don't have 4 more wins or something.
Jeremy, the overall way that this football program is put together, and you understand that Dave Arand is under tremendous heat. This has been a disappointing year, shockingly in a lot of ways, but also coming off how it ended last year. Do you feel like this is not really what he wanted as far as the new changes? It seems like he wanted to be equal across the board with no additional for maybe market value, so to speak. Is this something that you get the feeling he's embracing because he knows he has no other choice?
I've heard him speak on several occasions about NIL, and my sense is that he has had his own philosophical change on the approach, feeling maybe not more comfortable per se, but more at peace in a sense with this is how it's got to be. And so I do think there's some change in his attitude and approach to it. I don't think anything that's happening, and he doesn't control this, and Baylor doesn't control this. GxG does, and the council advises GxG. But there's not been. It's not a, oh crap, I've had a terrible year, I better change my philosophy on NIL. I think it's more his evolution as a coach, head coach, and as how he goes about running a program and what the program looks like and feels like culturally and so forth.
Is this also the latest news that came out at the end of last week? No matter what happens going forward, Dave Aranda running the program, or if in fact there's a coaching change, that this puts Baylor in a better position, whoever that is as the next head coach, if that happens?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our GxG and the council's budgeting and decision-making about how the budget is used is in a sense agnostic to who the coach is. We're doing things that are for the betterment of Baylor athletics and all of our sports, no matter what. So, yeah.
Let me ask you this. You have the donors. We know whose names are on buildings. We understand all that. My goodness, the Fudge name on the football operations center, which Dave Aranda's had a lot of impact on as far as being a part of that. But you have a lot of those names. Isn't it just as also important for somebody that does $100 a month or $1,000 a year? How much of that, or is that, one guy can write a check for $25,000 or for $2 million. How much of the army ants, so to speak, those who are Baylor fans or alums or whoever, if they themselves started to add $100 a month, would that make a difference at all?
Absolutely. BaylorBears.com/GxG.
There you go.
We need everyone involved, no matter, whether you're giving the widow's mite or whether you're writing the really big check, right? And it does add up. We did a deal in Sikkim this summer. I think it was this summer. This summer, where, we said there's two people matching and, give, and we're going to double, your money that way. And so, we ended up with $100,000. That's not insignificant. And that was just over a period of a couple of weeks and, just some board posts. And so, yeah, I think it is. And, if there is a knock to be had, I think it is, we should have been and need to be and will be communicating more and better about NIL to get everybody involved. Again, just like Bear Foundation, this needs to be part of what people think about doing to help Baylor and to help Baylor athletics. And so, there'll be more of that coming. It's not a blame thing to me, but the reality is, again, John jumped into this thing over at Startup Waco right out of the gate, and he doesn't have a huge staff. There's not an army of rowdy donors, who are like, let's put a whole bunch of time and effort into this thing. We've got just a few people over there that have been doing the lion's share of the work. And this is not easy work. This is complex work. You're having to draft contracts and have lawyers involved, and you're having to negotiate with agents, right? Particularly in basketball now, like, you're dealing with agents, and agents right now in this NIL world are not necessarily all helpful. This is an unregulated space that you don't see in the professional sports, for example. And so an agent can say, hey, my guy's got an offer over here at this school, and you have no evidence of that. He may be making it up, and now you got to deal with this fact, right? And so it's tricky. And so John's done, frankly, amazing work given what he's got. And given, the fact that this is all just sort of lay people like me saying, this is important and Baylor can't do it, so we need to do it.
Well, your name's a CEO, a part of a massive, very successful company, but you've jumped in. Did you see the Caden Jenkins tweets last week?
I did.
All of a sudden, everything's good with him. You think that the change had anything to do with that?
I don't know what his tweets are necessarily. I've not talked to Caden directly, so someone speculated it might have been about his girlfriend. I don't know.
Jeremy, how much do you guys look at other collectives and And see their ideas, what they do. I know you guys are, like you mentioned, staff-wise, not very big right now, but I saw one, especially knowing that we were going to have you on, I looked at a lot of them just to kind of ask you some of these. A couple I saw have like subscription services, almost like the Netflix of NIL. Like, is that something you guys would want to offer?
Yeah, I mean, we have and continue to bounce around lots and lots of different ideas of what people care about and what they would be interested in giving money for that could go towards NIL. And so I think you're going to see, and John's really creative in that regard. I think you're going to see a lot more of those things coming out. One of the things that we saw other schools doing that we're looking at figuring out the legalities of how to do it, is like the idea of a raffle or a lottery type thing during games, right? And people buy tickets and someone wins, but a bunch of the proceeds go to NIL. So there's a lot of things that are working through all the complexity of it all to figure out how to do it. But yeah, we do pay attention to them. We have connections with a number of them directly. It's a fairly small world in a lot of ways in that sense. But that's also, again, back to the earlier question, why we try to keep some of this under wraps, right? I had Colt put a post on Sikkim. This is a really vivid example. Colt put a post on Sikkim about my meeting with the football team. And less than 24 hours later, I had someone who I know who is very, very close to the Matador Club over at Tech text me the screenshots of Colt's post and say, wow, what are you guys doing over there, right? So it's a very public space in that sense. And so, yeah, we wouldn't, go out there and say, here's exactly what we're doing. We trust everyone's premium, so they're going to keep this confidential.
They're at UT Parking in the chat room. It's an arms race. I commend Baylor for stepping up. They had no choice or get left behind. What is I know you got to go and we do too. What is the one frustration that you still have? Is it still that people ask about how they can get involved, but sometimes just don't know how to get involved, even though BaylorBears.com/GxG is up there?
Very good. I wouldn't say that's a frustration because, again, I can say we need to be doing more, right? Now, there is some of this that is paying attention. We've been running ads in football games with that BaylorBears.com/GxG site, and people are like, what? I didn't see that, right? So like some of it's like, hey, it's on you to pay attention, but we can do more and we will do more. I think in terms of frustration, I would say it's just the nature of NIL right now, and I'm hopeful it will be resolved with either litigation or with Congress or with the NCAA or some combination of all of that. But it is continued frustration from day one up until today that, we've taken something that some schools were doing behind the scenes, under the table, all of that to bend and break rules. And now they sort of, can do it a little more openly. Whereas, we still have our integrity. We still are Baylor and we still stand for our Christian values. And so we're not going to do some of that stuff. And so it sort of brought something that was very much in the shadows more into the light. And I think people get anxious about that, comparing apples to, in a sense, oranges, right? And so, just to give you a couple, very specific examples, we had a player in one of our sports and they were lured away to another school by NIL, and that school ended up not paying them what they promised. And that's very common. This is a very real Baylor example of it. And so we're proud that we have honored every commitment on everything we've said to every sport. We've paid out every single dollar. And so that's important to us. We want to be men and women of our word, right? And so you get things like that, and you get, people tampering in a sense with all of it and going around rules. And so you saw an example of, the Florida player and the collective had done a whole deal, and then the school said, oh, hold on, you're breaking the rules. And then he goes in, ends up in Arizona or wherever it was, right? And so, those kinds of things are still happening, and we need to have guardrails put around this thing so that we can all have a equal, chance at the fight. So there's a lot going on in that space, more than we have time to get into. But I'm hopeful that that legislation or NCAA or litigation, if it comes to that, resolve some of this.
Jeremy, I think the one frustration just for me watching some of this and how this has gone on the last 2 or 3 years has been whether or not it's been public enough or a little bit later than it should have been. Whatever it is, it looks like you have, as a group, stepped way into warp speed, excuse me. And sure enough, someone may watch this entire segment and go, okay, how do I get involved? Instead of like listening and not looking for what they want to hear, but it's BaylorBears.com/GxG. Jeremy, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Good luck moving forward.
Thank you, guys. See you later.
Jeremy Fudge, Advisory Council, GxG. GxG is green and gold. That's the abbreviation of it. And I